to them, whether that's the football players, the spirit squads. And then going live after, we got several complaints up in the office of how does a game sell out in 2 hours, when it was online ticketing. But we tried to explain, we've got COVID going on, we have reduced number of tickets, and the host school that you're going to compete at actually has control over how many they're allowing into the game and just the safety aspect of it. Now, the good news, and I know we'll talk about it a little bit later, is we've had the ability to have a game on TV. We've had the ability to stream our games, with technology the way it is now. At least you have something to offer people when you say, hey, it's sold out, but go watch it live here or catch it here.
Right.
The second thing I was thinking of, in terms of what you're preparing for is, school districts are all starting kind of on around here, at least. Nobody's on the same schedule. So while we're in week 4 of school and our quarantine numbers of our student athletes are pretty high, when we played Jinx last week, they were only on day 2 of school. And so their quarantine situations might have just been sports related, whereas ours have, the majority of ours have been because of whatever contact that they had at school. And so that's kind of going through that process has been, it's hard to tell a student athlete who's perfectly healthy, but just happened to sit in the wrong seat that day next to somebody who tests positive. You're not going to get to go run that cross country meet. You're missing 2 of your 10 meets that you get as a senior, and you have to sit out because of that. So that's kind of been the difficult side from ours. And unfortunately, it seems like every day we come to work, it's getting more and more of those phone calls having to be made.
What's your total number of quarantine athletes at the moment?
We currently have 51 student athletes quarantined, but we have a list of, I believe it was 14 of them that have been off of quarantine over the last few weeks. So, we were huddling around 60 to 70 student athletes at a time, but each day, somebody comes on and somebody goes off throughout that process. And we have probably 1,500 student athletes, to put that in perspective.
Okay. So if I was better at math, I'd be able to do a percent. I couldn't do it right there.
Right.
Do you feel like going into the season, everything was optional in terms of summer training, in terms of workouts and things like that, because it was for the safety of the kids and making sure everybody was comfortable for it, with it? With that being the case, do you feel like your teams were not as prepared? I mean, you not being a coach, but just from what you're hearing from your coaches, I know that there was worries about liability and injuries going into these seasons with less of a preparation. What was the conversations internally about those topics?
I do. I feel like, the drain on our coaches, what they would do in a normal year compared to what I would say allowed to, and not necessarily allowed. I mean, they all understood it. Not one person wanted to put a student athlete or their family in a position to not be in a safe situation. But when you're tasked with, success as a measure of, of winning and losing as a measure of that success, then there's obviously that internal pressure. But we had some key players this summer who didn't feel comfortable being here. And there's a difference to that. There's the toughness that's built sometimes in those summer workouts, and there's preparation that goes into that. And so I think that, a lot of people felt like their hands were tied. I'm actually married to a college coach who I think he experiences the same thing. And I try to tell him from the administrative side is, let's look at the end goal. And that's what I try to tell our coaches. And the end goal is to have a season. And the end goal is to not have interruptions in the season. And if that takes a little bit of little heartache here in the summer, or a little bit of distraction from preparation, then that may be what we have to do in order to get through our seasons.
The biggest thing that everybody talked about leading up to it was, how do we get to the field, right? How do we get there? But now we're kind of seeing, whether it's parents or community members that haven't been around this all the time, the last 6 months, they're starting to expect what usually happens in the fall. And it's interesting conversations trying to get them back on the same page with the school. I think that's pretty common amongst a lot of ADs out there right now, but not a lot of ADs have had the amount of games that you've had and the the amount of competitions you had and the I would say the intensity of your big games have happened the last 3 weeks. So leading up, wrapping up this topic about rivalry, big games, and how to do the best you can with the guidelines that you have to follow, but also know that there's intensity around the communities about the competition. What advice do you have for those that may not have had a big game yet, that they can take back to their school and feel prepared going into a heated matchup?
When we spoke the other day, I kind of laughed and I said, keep all the kids at home that that you need to play in the game, reduce. And I know that, and joking, but that obviously that's the way that you can feel. But I think right now approaching, you kind of say we tell our kids play every game like it's your last. I think really putting that into perspective, I would think that anybody who's been in this situation, that's either anticipating that first game. There is so much stress that goes into making sure, as an administrator, how do we enforce masks and social distancing and get the right amount of people and the right people in our games and provide technologies to the ones who can't. But the minute that event kicks off and the minute that game happens, there's such a sigh of relief that you got there, because the pressure to get you there can be very overwhelming. I remember our first volleyball game in the beginning of August, and just thought, oh my God, this much anxiety, because I thought, how much at the gate are we going to deal with people who don't want to wear masks, that are going to be upset with us, that now, security and administrative make it a headache. But we felt like communication up front, and we were blasting our expectations of what the game's going to look like, our procedures. We were prepared with extra masks at the gate. We try to mitigate any of those situation that might create environment just to get to the game. And then, I mean, realistically, you want to look at somebody and say, hey, our goal is for these kids to compete. And so we're going to do it in the safest manner and try to keep them as safe as possible. And as long as you guys can do what you're supposed to do, you get to come to the games and watch it until our capacity. And if not, then, the next step would be like some of these colleges and professional where there's no fans in the stand, which obviously would be the very last resort for us administratively, because nobody wants to tell somebody they can't watch their own kid compete.
Right. And so much of, what these games are, especially this time of year, is a lot of bringing the community together. It's everybody's coming back from summer, leading into the fall. There's a lot of pep rallies, and it's just, it's fall, right? It's everybody has this feeling towards it. And we talk so much about getting our kids to the games and thinking that that's going to recreate the fall that we know. But what we're kind of noticing is that there's these other external or extracurricular activities that we do outside of the competition in the community, but we can't do those. So, what fall festivities typically happen for you and have a big effect on the community that you're having to cancel or adjust?
Well, we started out, we always have a back to school bash. The high school kids just love it. And it's an activity where you're sticking 1,000, 1,500 kids in a small space and everybody's touching and pushing and whatever. So the school district canceled that. Pep assemblies, as we know it this year, have kind of gone by the wayside. We're looking at opportunities to try to recreate that. But we all know how that feels when you're sitting in an arena or a gym and you're having the band and the spirit squads and everybody that loves being a part of that. So trying to recreate that for the kids. Homecoming dance, we're not going to have that. You're just going to have a recognition. And so there's so many things you can't do now that it's hard to wrap your head around what you can. And so we're trying to find those opportunities for those, not necessarily just our student athletes, but the whole student body, because I think that we always joke